Welcome to the Afghanistan Project podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and today I'll be moderating a discussion between two distinguished guests, Center for Immigration Studies board member Phillip Linderman and Afghan Evac Coalition president and founder Shawn VanDiver. We'll be discussing a series of articles that Phillip has authored in the American Conservative about the vetting of our Afghan allies and the ties between the Afghan Evac Coalition and groups who are advocating for the border to be more porous in Phillip's estimation. So without further ado, I'm going to do background on both of you, and then we will jump into the content. Phillip Linderman is a retired State Department senior foreign service officer. Over a 3-decade career, he served abroad in U.S. embassies and consulates in Belgium, Mexico, Ecuador, Germany, Cuba, Chile, and Trinidad. He also represented U.S. interests at the Organization of American States and the European Union. Linderman's diplomatic duties often focused on U.S. border security, international travel, and migration policies, giving him wide experience in working with foreign governments, as well as U.S. law enforcement and intelligence partners on matters such as visa and passport fraud, human trafficking, terrorist travel, watch listing, and identity information collection and use. Shawn VanDiver is the founder of Afghan Evac. A vocal proponent of civic engagement at all levels, Shawn serves as vice chair of the San Diego Convention Center and is the founder of the San Diego chapter of the Truman National Security Project. Additionally, he serves on the board of directors for Vets Community Connections and the Veterans Community Oversight and Engagement Board. Shawn attended National University, the Naval Postgraduate School, and University of San Francisco, and holds degrees and certifications related to Homeland Security, cybersecurity, emergency management, and public leadership. Shawn is a Navy veteran, proud father, and avid sailor. I didn't know you sailed, Shawn. How interesting. Well, thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate you both agreeing to talk about this important topic.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, Beth.
Absolutely. Well, Phillip, I'd like to invite you first to talk briefly about both of your recent articles, which are entitled "The Afghan Refugee Program is an Unfixable Mess and May Bring the Next Terrorist Attack," and "The Veterans Group Running Interference for Open Border NGOs."
Well, sure. I think you have to step back on this question of the Afghans and look at it from the American optic of the past 4 years of the Biden administration and its open border policies that created migration chaos in our country, brought in over 10 million to 12 million, exact numbers not sure, of foreign nationals to our country, causing chaos, basically upending the normal immigration refugee processes that were in place in this country. All done, the reason why President Biden, Secretary Mayorkas, Secretary Blinken engaged in this policy is still not entirely clear. But the results are clear, and we have a new administration that very much believes in the rule of law and immigration matters, a strong border, and has paused the intake of foreign nationals into our country. We have to also consider right now in the United States there are over 50 million people not born in the United States, many of them beyond our cultural values, not native English speakers. It is time, as I think the President Trump main initiative is, to pause all of this intake of foreign nationals into our country so we can catch our breath, we can bring order to the process, we can restore the rule of law, and we can make sure that there is adequate social services and, above all, the protections that we require so that our country is not again exposed to terrorist and criminal activities. I mean, that right now is the main engine of what President Trump is doing, and it was supported by a majority of the voters, obviously. This is not a question of some policy that the president has pulled out of his back pocket. This was front and center in the 2024 election. So therefore, you look now at Afghanistan, and what we know, as you mentioned, I have a background in the State Department and in vetting and many contacts and colleagues there. Whistleblowers have informed us that the CARE operation is doing a very lax job on vetting people It has been corrupted by all of the influences of people who want to come to the United States. It has spent over $4 billion on to $5 billion. And here's the final line, maybe Shawn could address this. We have taken in 200,000 Afghans. We recognize that many of them served us bravely in our 20-year effort in that country. So that's why I wrote these articles, to challenge the idea that our obligation to Afghanistan, the Afghans who are friends there, has in fact not been met. We've taken 200,000. We went to the country in the beginning, not because of the well-being of the Afghans. We have nothing against the Afghans, fine people, not in our geopolitical national interest sphere. I think that's one of the lessons. But after a 20-year obligation trying to build a better nation state there, we regrettably failed. We did our best. I believe that we have made an honorable discharge of our duties. I believe that the national interest of the United States right now at this moment calls on us, as the President has done, to pause the intake of these folks. Ultimately, Afghanistan will be a better country if the Afghans who more or less believe in our values stay and try to resist and to build a better country. The idea that when your country collapses, you come rushing to the United States needs to be challenged. And for all of these reasons, it's a mixed bag of different reasons, but they come back to the point that President Trump is on the right track, pausing migration. We have fulfilled our obligations, 200,000, and we have spent 20 years of American treasure and dear life trying to build a better way for the Afghans. So on that point, I think the U.S. national honor has also been satisfied. But ultimately, we do not have I'll stop with this point, we do not have the capacity to reliably vet these people who come to us in great numbers, whether they're SIVs or refugees, whichever category. About 145,000 are SIVs and IVs. About 40,000 are refugees or SOEs. And we do not have the capacity to reliably vet them. This is what whistleblowers inside CARE report to us. This is what I know from my own experience of working in government with the intel that we have. And I submit it is not in the U.S. national interest to run these risks. So, Shawn, we honor your service. We honor all of the American servicemen who were there and the Afghans who worked with us. But let them fight for their country, let them fight for their future. Opening a restaurant in suburban Washington or driving an Uber is not their honorable future. Their honorable future is to recover their country. Thanks, Beth.
Yeah, Philip, you said a lot of things that I have questions about for the future, but Shawn, I would ask you to start. Let's leave vetting. Vetting is my first question to get into next. So I would ask you to leave that aside for now, and I give you 3 minutes to respond to those remarks, Shawn.
Sure. Thank you so much, Beth, and thanks, Phil, for coming here today. You said you honored my service and the service of other veterans. I feel strongly that foreign service officers should be venerated the same way that veterans are. So thank you for your service. And I have a lot of questions about your article. What I'm going to dive in first on is that it sounds like you're advocating for no immigration based on cultural fit, and then talking about vetting and all these various things, and talking about the honorable thing for Afghans to do. Look, who are we to say what's honorable for them after we told them, hey, you stand with us, we're going to stand with you? Who are we to say that we got 200,000 here, there's 200,000 left, sorry, the luck of the draw wasn't in your favor? I think American promises have to matter, Philip. And your article has says a bunch of stuff that maybe sounds good in a vacuum, but when it meets the test of reality, we run into all of these folks did something in our interest. They stood with us. They said, hey, you're here in my country. I want to help you because I believe in your mission. And we said, yeah, great. You do that, you become one of us. And now what you're advocating for is pulling the rug out from underneath them. Look, there is no question that the withdrawal in August was a total disaster. It's just no question, right? I reject when the Biden administration would say it was the largest airlift in history. That is absolutely bonkers. Like, sure, it may have been the largest airlift in history. How many people did you leave behind? And veterans and frontline civilians and folks all across this country worked together and made them build the strongest, safest legal immigration pathway our country's ever seen. And that's why it was really surprising when your article came out of nowhere to say that it wasn't working and that we should stop it, because I just fundamentally disagree. And that's all I have to say.
So I would love to get into the vetting piece. You mentioned this too in your introduction, Philip, that in the Afghan refugee program is an unfixable mess. You talk about a whistleblower who alleged that CARE is vetting the backgrounds of Afghans and has allowed the process to be corrupted through fraud and bribery. I would love to know if you were able to corroborate that information by looking into which entities are actually charged with vetting the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program or USRAP applicants, and which entities are charged with vetting SIV, the Special Immigrant Visa Program applicants. Because that allegation is, I've been talking, I've written over 100,000 words on post-withdrawal Afghanistan. And the U.S. government has never once told me that CARE is involved. And for those who don't know what CARE is, it's the, and now it's going to escape me, isn't it?
Coordinator
for Afghan relocation efforts, right? So this is the group that is moving Afghans after they've been vetted. So what have you found about what USRAP vetting is done and what SIV vetting is done, Philip?
Well, as I mentioned, this is when we use the expression CARE, we're talking about the entire enterprise. To be clear, CARE is focused on the Afghan part. It leads back to U.S. government entities that vet people that come into the country, whether they're coming on a visa, a conventional visa, whether they're coming as an SIV, or whether they're coming as a refugee, or whether they're being processed as an asylum seeker. Right? They all lead back to the same instruments of U.S. government intelligence that will vet a person. And so when we're talking about CARE, I realize that people who are interviewing and assessing Afghan paperwork, etc., are not necessarily the actual USG vetters. But when I'm talking about the entire enterprise, just to be clear. And what U.S. government people who have told me on this go back to the Biden administration. John Feiner, Deputy National Security Advisor, was given the instructions that we're going to move Afghans and we're going to flip the U.S. government standard, which is that unless you can clear someone who's been vetted, they're not authorized to come. While Feiner and company flipped the U.S. standard to say, unless you find any derogatory, they are allowed to come. You see how fundamentally different that is in the process. That is not the U.S. government standard. And if you go back to the original standard that we've used consistently across all vetting on people, you will find that many Afghans, because of the lack of reliable identity information, the lack of reliable intelligence, the lack of reliable other pieces of the vetting process, we just can't clear them. So that is the fundamental thing that the whistleblowers brought out to me. That is a different standard. And we should return to the original standard. We should keep the original standard. It will make us, unfortunately, unable to vet many, many Afghans. And the U.S. national interest here, Shawn, has to be that we protect the United States, we protect our communities, etc., and we don't bring people in that we haven't cleared. That means we do not bring people in that we couldn't find any derogatory information. No, the standard has to be we were able to clear them. It's a fundamental difference, and it means a vastly different outcome in terms of the number of people that we can clear. So that's what I was trying to get at that in this. Yeah, if that makes sense. Did I communicate the idea? Do you understand what I mean?
I think, yeah, and Shawn, I would love to hear your response. I mean, US Rep and SIV vetting are inherently different, right? Shawn, I would love to hear your take on what is the same, what is different, what these people are put through in both programs, including like polygraph tests in at least some SIV cases. Please go ahead and go into that.
So the first thing that I want to talk about is that, Phillip, you've mentioned twice now things in the national interest, right? Look, when we talk about our partnership with our Afghan allies and what's in our national interest, it is very clearly in our national interest to keep the commitments that we make regarding our national security, right? So if we show up in a country and we say we need help to prosecute this war, it's in our national interest to keep the promises to those people that we make. Or in the cases of places like Pakistan, when we show up and we say, hey, we've got a bunch of people here that we need to get through processing, we promise we're going to do that in 2 years. It's in our national interest to keep those promises. There's a bunch of stuff here that I want to talk about. I'm just going to take it in no particular order. The first thing is that that using CARE to talk about the whole enterprise, the whole interagency, is a little bit funk, right? The agencies responsible for their mission do their mission. And setting up the multiple steps, overseas processing, on-site collaboration has enhanced our ability to vet. CARE doesn't do any vetting. CARE is a travel agency. CARE coordinates all of the different pieces of this, but DHS, the intelligence community, all of these different places do their job, and they did not flip you're conflating selection, right? These are people who were selected to be looked at due to their ties to the U.S., and then they're reviewed on the merit, right? So it's not like any Afghan who walks up can get cleared. People are identified and selected due to their ties with the USG. Multiple agencies screen them and vet to clear them and approve them according to law, right? There's redundant vetting lanes. Afghan parolees, SIV applicants, refugees are screened across multiple databases, biometric, biographic, criminal, intelligence, by agencies that include DHS, FBI, DOD, various parts of the intelligence community, international partners, right? Many evacuees are also, or many SIVs and refugees are also vetted through NATO and ISAF partner forces. Our allies helped gather and verify data over 2 decades. The problem is not that we don't have enough information. The problem is that it gets slowed down because we have too much information. And when data is incomplete, the U.S. doesn't blindly approve people. Applicants are held for additional review or denied entry. This is why it takes years for these things to happen. Many have been turned away. In fact, many who were really close to the U.S. during their time have been turned away because of family members or other associates. Like, there's been a lot of surprise at some people that had been turned away because we're trending towards the cautious. Even if the Afghan government records are weak, U.S. vetting draws from coalition military logs, battlefield reporting, visa interview data, biometric scans, 20 years of data on these people that were associated with us, right? There's not a lack of reliable data. There's too much data. And look, again, the real vetting failure here isn't being too lenient. It was being too slow. Thousands were stranded across multiple countries because of excessive caution, not recklessness, right? The thing that you're saying is fundamentally untrue, and it belies a fundamental misunderstanding of how this works. But a lot of people read your article that work in the evac space, Phil, and said, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. This isn't how it works. So I have a hard time with a lot of the stuff that's in there and the fundamental misunderstanding with how the vetting is working. Abandoning our allies jeopardizes America's national security. That's the ultimate bottom line here, right? If we abandon our allies, we jeopardize our national security now and including in future conflicts.
I wanted to ask a follow-up about the vetting, because in there's an allegation in the report that CARE has done everything it can to clear hits and assume the national security risks of doing so, Philip. And I just wondered if in your research for this piece you had turned up any information about the denial rates for Special Immigrant Visa, COM approval, the Chief of Mission, which is like the first hurdle to SIV, and the acceptance rate for U.S. RAP cases, just to be able to show. I mean, had you found any data to show those things?
Well, I'll get to that, Beth, but let's just go back to Shawn. I want to emphasize a couple points, which are, one, I worked personally in doing this in my career, so I have some context about how reliable the intel is, personal identity information, biometrics, whatever, FR, whatever it might be, and matching that to people who come from traditional societies like Afghanistan. It's a very hard task. The European intel is lousy, et cetera, et cetera. It's personal identity information. And on that score, I'm retired. I admit that, and I've been away from this for a while. But I have had people who are doing the vetting, are very close to the vetting, in evaluating the outcome. Whistleblowers tell me that the standard has been flipped. So that's this one. We can dispute that, but I wanted to be clear that that's what my contention is. I do not have best data that breaks down SIVs, IVs, refugees, or asylum seeker refusal rates. Again, the CARE operation is a large operation, as Shawn rightly said. It's first the intake. There's a process of intaking and evaluation, which they're using contractors who, for linguistic reasons or cultural reasons, whatever, that are part of the process. It's understandable. The Americans should hold the final decision, but using a linguist to give you context, to read documents, or et cetera, that's fundamental. We do that everywhere. But the process, again, whistleblowers to me, indicates that CARE is too lax. The process is not stringent. The ability to influence the process from outsiders who have interests that are to get people into the United States, regardless of their background, regardless of whatever service they did for the American military, diplomatic effort, etc., economic effort, is out of proportion. The first thing CARE has to do is that this person is a reliable, has been brought to us with a reliable file that says he was someone who is meritoriously in the group of people we should vet and consider. I mean, the CIGAR report, Shawn, from 23, in which we, unfortunately, I mean, Americans are susceptible to corruption just like anybody else, in which Americans are vouching for people who do not have a claim, the credit. That was a problem that was identified among our, diplomats, soldiers, Marines, whatever, right? The process has got considerable elements of weakness that should call us to demand a higher standard. The man who was planning the Afghan man who was planning a terrorist strike in Oklahoma went through this process. Why should we run any risk like this? Why should we run any risk of bringing into our country another Muhammad Atta who is determined to strike at our communities? That is the question. It's the national interest, which is a higher national interest, protecting the American homeland. I mean, when we go to a diplomatic or a military effort in Afghanistan or wherever it is the underlying premise that if we fail, you have a ticket to the United States. I dispute that. And so I'll stop with that and let somebody else speak.
So I just want to fact check on the numbers. So if CARE was doing everything it can to clear hits, which CARE isn't making these decisions, then we would see pretty high Chief of Mission approvals. We see 37% chief of mission approval in the SIV program because they are constantly looking for reasons to deny people. And it is an incredibly difficult hurdle. And there is no acceptance rate information for the US RAP because I've asked for it multiple times. But I can tell you that there are tens of thousands of US RAP referrals that were not found to contain adequate information to bring them just into. And US RAP is unique in that an Afghan cannot self-refer to the US RAP. They must be referred to the US RAP by the US entity that supported them while they were employed. And so that's another layer of vetting. But I want to talk, we can move forward to Tahiti because that was something I wanted to ask you about. You cited the case of Nasir Ahmad Tawhidi, who was arrested last year for plotting a horrifying election day plot on ISIS's behalf, and you linked his arrival with the task force that became CARE. But as we've talked about, CARE isn't vetting individuals. And because Tawhidi arrived, as CIS actually states in a December piece about adding Tawhidi to their national security vetting failures database, he arrived with humanitarian parole during Operation Allies Welcome, which was before we had created these increased and enhanced vetting procedures to not let anything like this happen again because it was horrifying. And Shawn, I would love you to respond about Tawhidi. You actually were the first person to send me an article about covering Tawhidi in the media because you wanted to immediately get that story out. And I recall that email hitting my inbox, and it was the first place I heard about that case. So Shawn, do you want to bring up or would you like to talk about the Tawhidi case and how it relates to this current argument of what we're doing now for refugee vetting? And SIV vetting.
A few things, right? I want to talk about that. I want to give you the top lines, and then I'm going to get deep. The top lines are: one, the Tawhidi case is a case of the system working, and we'll talk about why that's true in a moment. Philip, I want to respond to some of the things you said. Zero risk is a political fantasy, right? Every immigration process carries risk. The question is whether or not the risk is being responsibly managed. And in this case, it is. And the moral and strategic payoff is worth it, right? The reality is we've relocated 200,000 Afghans, right? The number of national security concerns identified is so extraordinarily small. And this is a false equivalence, right? Every population, including military veterans, diplomats, elected officials, has a few bad actors. That doesn't make the whole group suspect, right? Refugees go through far more screening than tourists, students, even some employment visa holders, and SIVs as well, right? So I just can't give any credence to this idea that because there is risk, we should not do this at all. And then I want to get back to the idea that you keep citing that CARE, you have these whistleblowers within CARE. Phil, I got to tell you, I don't think your whistleblowers know what they're talking about. Because CARE doesn't clear any hits at all. They've never cleared hits. They don't have any decision-making authority related to our homeland security. Any decisions to approve an Afghan's case were made by the Department of Homeland Security in the case of refugees, or consular officials, after extensive consultations with law enforcement, intelligence, and counterterrorism. Now, let's talk about the Tawhidi case. Let's talk about the Tawhidi case. The Tawhidi case, for those that are not familiar, is the case of an Afghan who lived in Oklahoma, who was plotting a election day attack. Now, he came here through humanitarian parole during the big evacuation, right? He was one of the 80,000 or so Afghans that came here in August to September, October of 2021. He went through some vetting then. We know that there were some challenges there, and actually the Biden administration identified those challenges, deported some folks, got rid of some folks who they determined, these folks aren't very good. In fact, many of them weren't even let in through the airport. In this case, he didn't radicalize until much later, and as soon as he radicalized, the FBI caught it, and they were watching him, and they indicted him, and they kept our country safe because our systems work well. We haven't had an incident where somebody did something bad at having come through Enduring Welcome, which is our country's safest, most secure legal immigration pathway, that the Biden administration worked with AfghanEvac and others to make sure that things like this won't happen. So when people talk about that Tahiti case, I actually don't understand what they're talking about, because it's not a vetting failure. You can't pre-crime. It's not Minority Report, right? You can't find something that's not there. Once there's something there, you find it and you take care of it, which is exactly what happened. We should be lauding this case, lauding the Department of Justice and the FBI and our intelligence communities for catching it, because exactly what should have happened did happen. And the idea that like one Afghan being an asshole is indicative that we shouldn't have people come here, that's just crazy. You wouldn't believe the things that I saw while I was in the military that service members did. Dumb things, criminal things that service members did. And you know what we did with them? We identified them, we isolated them, and then we excised them, which is what you're supposed to do with the bad actors. Not just wholesale write them off.
Philip, would you like to respond to that one?
Well, I'd like to return maybe to the data that you mentioned, Beth. Shawn
Sure.
makes a good point. I will respond to that. So we have the latest data that I have, which is very up to date, says we've approved 142,000 SIVs. So I am unclear your point about the refusal rate. We have done 142,000. My premise is you can maybe give some more insight about what you were getting at with the data, but to go to Shawn's point, Tahiti is an example in which this general idea that we bring in vast numbers of people from a different culture and a different perspective is a healthy process in the United States. I think the Trump election last year is an indication that it is perfectly American to pause these activities as much as it is to engage in them. As we did in the 1920s when we paused massive immigration into the United States, this is also a part of the American identity so that we can assimilate, Americanize people, language, cultural values. And I just returned to my original point, which we have 50 million people in the United States who were not born here. Shawn, I don't know what you think is the adequate number of Afghans that we have to admit to satisfy your sense of duty and obligation and honor to them.
Every single person that served alongside us and is security vetted to come here.
Yeah, I mean, I dispute that is hundreds of thousands of people. Even when it takes their immediate children, I dispute that is hundreds of thousands of people. I submit that Afghanistan will be a better place if we re-infiltrate people into their country, that they can fight for their country, that they can resist for their country, and that they don't come to the United States as their first recourse. If my country were imploding, I would not be looking to move to Canada. And I do not think that it goes hand in hand when the United States engages around the world and there's failure, that we have an obligation to bring everybody out that work with us. I don't think that's in the United States national interest. I fundamentally disagree with you on that point, Shawn. And I think that the United States has done its obligation. Ben, Beth, I'll stop with this. We've taken right now 142,000 SIVs. That doesn't include the other IVs, which is another 15,000. It does not include the refugees. It does not include the parolees. While the vetting standard may slightly differ depending on the pathway that the person is being vetted for to enter the United States, they all return to a fundamental USG vetting process based on our intelligence, based on our identity information. Now, it varies somewhat, but whether you're a parolee or whether you're a regular visa holder or an SIV, you're all going to come back to that touchstone. There are other intel pieces can come into it, particularly on the refugee side of the case. But there's a USG standard. And of course, it is not run by CARE. CARE filters people who are then processed and ultimately vetted through this rigorous process, unless the rigorous process, in the case of Afghans, gets twisted because of political influence from the Biden administration that says bring in as many of these people as possible, because we know the Biden administration priority from the very beginning of that dubious governance was to admit people into our country for radical reasons that have not fully been diagnosed, but they were clearly there. Otherwise, you don't blow up a legal immigration system as Mayorkas did, right? And so there's a bunch of stuff I touched on in that point I just made. But please tell me, Shawn, how many Afghans do we have to bring into the United States before your sense of duty is obligated?
So I want to break in, and I just want to respond. The reason that I brought up the calm denials is to show that the assertion that CARE is doing everything it can to clear hits is in fact incorrect. And but that's what this is but this is a direct quote from the article, is that CARE has done everything that CARE has done everything it can to clear hits and assume the national security risks of
CARE doesn't. I didn't say CARE cleared hits.
CARE has done everything it can to clear hits and assume the national security risks of doing so. I have it right here on page 2.
All right. Well, then I will amplify by saying the CARE enterprise, which includes the vetting process, which is done by the USG.
Phillip, I gotta interrupt here. You keep saying things that are just fundamentally wrong and inaccurate. It belies a fundamental misunderstanding of how this works. You keep saying there's 142,000 SIVs. There haven't been 142,000 SIVs. Phillip,
we've only how many? Can I pause for a minute? Let's talk about that, because Shawn, I would say that number could be correct if you're talking about secondary SIV individuals, but also CIS has said inaccurately before that everyone who came in through Allies Welcome went from HP to getting an SIV, and that is not what happened. They came in on parole. Parole had to be re-extended. There are still people on re-extensions of parole, and so they did not get SIV. You only can achieve an SIV if you can prove that you provided faithful and valuable service to the U.S. government or a U.S. government contractor for 1 year at least, and you need to have the contract number, you need to have a supervisor letter of recommendation, you need to have your HR validation, and then you go through those additional vetting processes down the road. But there haven't been, this is my question for you, Shawn, how many SIVs, primary SIVs, has Congress allocated in the entire history of the program?
Oh, it's 50,000 something right now.
So
we need more, and we only have 10,000 left. So it's about 40,000 SIVs have been approved, have come here with their family members. Now, what's really important
to note... 142,000, Shawn.
Is
that would be...
766 primary SIVs plus followed...
There can't be that many primary SIVs. We haven't allocated that many.
No, not primary plus family members.
Okay.
142,000. I have the data from March 21st through March 21st. That's primary SIV holders, spouse, and children 21 and under. Right? That's what that is. 142,000.
So you asked how many people need to come here, and I interrupted and said it earlier. But Phillip, we do it till the job is done. That's what we do. That's what the United States military does.
Because we promised.
Because
you know,
Who promised?
When I worked...
Sorry, go ahead.
When I worked for the National Ground Intelligence Center, it was following several years having focused on the U.S.'s time in Afghanistan, and we made endless promises to get Afghans to work with us, and we said, we will not abandon you if you work with us, because they knew at that time that the Afghans had to make a deadly choice between supporting us and supporting the Taliban. And you can look at we would go around and do our surveys, who supports us. The Taliban would go around and do the same surveys at night. They were living in an incredibly dangerous environment. There were people who would work on bases, and then they had to take off their uniform before they could leave the base so that they didn't get targeted on the way home, so that their neighbors didn't even know that they worked for the U.S. government, because we were fighting a counterinsurgency, trying to win hearts and minds, and trying to fight against a deadly enemy in a country where they had total impunity to operate. So it was...
Okay, fair enough. Is not abandoning them mean they get a visa? Why can't it be that we support them through other means and they fight for their country?
Well, we haven't done that.
Pull the rug out from under
Why
people,
couldn't
right?
that be the emphasis?
That is something people are looking at.
Yeah,
This isn't
give
just
them
about
material
immigration.
support. Why do they want to abandon their country?
But this is how we got into this situation in the first
Hey,
place.
Phil, give me a
No,
chance
we
to
got
talk.
this. We went
Go-
to kill we went to kill bin Laden, and we made a promise to the American people we were not engaging in nation building. It had nothing to do with the Afghans. It had everything to do with killing bin Laden and breaking up Al Qaeda. It did not
When
have
things
anything
change
to
on
do
the
with
ground,
rebuilding
Philip, when
the country.
President Obama killed bin Laden, we still had a mission to accomplish, and they were continuing it down the path. President Trump kept us in Afghanistan. President Biden pulled us out of Afghanistan. This isn't just about immigration. It's about national honor, future alliances, and the fight against authoritarianism. Broken promises break alliances. If we abandon those
What
who serve
about what
alongside us,
President Trump is
why would
now
anyone
saying?
ever help us again from you? Hey, Phil, I let you talk. How about you pipe down for a second and let me talk? From Ukraine to Taiwan, the world is watching how we treat our partners. And veterans are watching too. The same people who went door to door with these interpreters, drivers, everybody else, are now their fiercest advocates. They know who these people are, and these allies risked their lives for the U.S. and are now in danger because of that loyalty. That makes us responsible, not because we're charitable, but because we're accountable and because the United States is, in fact, exceptional. We do hold ourselves to a higher standard. We do owe it to these folks because we told them we would do this.
And I'd love to ask the next question. I think it flows really well into this, and it's another problem that I had with your article, Philip. You cite the fact that Afghans are able to fly out to third countries as evidence that they aren't facing persecution in their homeland. Did you research the Taliban's reprisal campaign while you were writing this article, and what can you tell me about the dangers that our allies face if they are forced to return from, say, Qatar, Albania, Pakistan, the US to Afghanistan right now? And I'm talking about not just men, but also the women who worked for us and who are incredibly endangered.
Okay, so you know some are allowed, the Taliban allows some to leave, right? You know that. This comes to me from people who are who are processing, so some can leave. But Taliban is manipulating the situation for sure, right? So some they allow to leave, some they persecute. I don't dispute that. But I'm not sure where you're going with your question. If it goes to the point of establishing that the Taliban is manipulating the situation, I think we're all in agreement on that.
I'm asking specifically, did you research their reprisal campaign and whom they are killing, and how long they have been killing their enemies, our allies? And if that's going on, I mean, did you do research into, you say that they aren't facing persecution in their homeland. Did you do the research into the persecution they face in their homeland?
Some of them face persecution, no doubt. No one is disputing that.
Shawn, what would?
But Beth, just the point. You recognize that the Taliban is allowing some people to leave. And they're manipulating the situation. They are manipulating the goodwill that we have because they're ruthless. I concede that without any hesitation. They are our enemies. I join Shawn in agreeing with that. I just dispute the idea that U.S. policy, honor, and national interest means we bring them all out. I think we should have another policy that is not focused on pulling people to the United States.
Well, okay. Shawn, would you like to respond? Would you say that they're at risk if they return, and what those risks are?
I would love to. I'm going to respond to this idea of national policy changing. Philip, the president can change national policy, absolutely. But you can't go back on a policy when there's people, especially Americans, who care so much about them, who are depending on it, right? Myself and thousands of people have upended their lives for the last 4 years to unfuck what the government was messing up.
Sure.
And we got this to the right place. It's safe, it's secure, it's legal immigration. And look, the truth is that the loudest critics often lack real-world experience with this work, right? That's why people are having a hard time understanding what you're saying because it's so off base. it seems like you're peddling paranoia, not policy. It is undisputable that if these folks go back, they are in danger. And in fact, by President Trump pausing all of this effort, the implicit protection, both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, could be viewed as going away, which means it puts them more in danger. Now, President Trump campaigned on Afghanistan. He brought the Taliban to Camp David, signed the Doha Agreement, did all of that, had a lot to say about President Biden's performance, as we all did, during August of 2021. Talked about it during every debate. It came up every day of the RNC. They marched the Abbey Gate families out onto the stage there. Mike Waltz said he wanted to throw a chair through a window when he was in Congress because he was so pissed off we were leaving our allies behind. And so the Trump administration keeps talking about promises made, promises kept. All I'm seeing is promises broken. And I don't understand why DOJ can move so fast to break all of these things, and why the administration can move so fast to stop these things from happening. But when we identify unintended consequences, or what we assume are unintended consequences, they can't move as fast to fix them. And it's having a real, meaningful, tangible impact on both our Afghan allies who are waiting, who have been patiently waiting for 3 years or more, and on the veterans who served alongside them. We're seeing breakdowns amongst the veteran community in trust in our government, which is not where we want to go, right? President Trump has done a lot of work to build up goodwill among veterans communities, and he's squandering all that. He's letting Stephen Miller squander all of that, and I don't know that he knows that.
Well, his first promise, Shawn, was to pause the border chaos that his predecessor had.
What does that have to do with Afghans?
Afghans are part of the 10 million plus that have come into our country.
Philip, do you have numbers? Can you tell me how many?
I'm curious, Shawn, how many people out of Afghanistan, just roughly, would you say we are obligated to take?
I just said, Philip, every single person who put themselves at risk because of their relationship with us, both refugees and SIVs, they're equally important. The family members of our active duty service members.
3,000 of those, right? There are 3,000 active duty service member family members who are still stuck in Afghanistan. There are 100. Would you concede, Shawn, that the U.S. government gets to give the final word on how many of them are eligible? I mean, if you were to have,
I just reject the notion that it needs to be a number and not a mission complete.
A ballpark number. How about a ballpark number, Shawn?
We brought 200,000 here. There's about 200,000, 250,000 left to go, so about 500,000.
So you half a million. You'd say half a million. Okay, I'll put it out there, 500,000. I think the Trump administration would say, I will speak for myself. I can't speak for the Trump administration. I'm a private citizen. But I would suggest that 500,000 people is a large number, and that we don't have the capacity to vet them. The Taliban manipulate the situation, and that we have done our best, and then we have to live with the consequences of what a new administration wants to do in terms of immigration policy, and it does include Afghanistan.
So I'd like to add a quick fact check here, just a letter from Representatives Michael Lawler, Michael McCall, and Richard Hudson, who addressed an open letter to the president in which they noted that shutting down CARE and Operation Enduring Welcome would abandon over 200,000 wartime allies and have lasting consequences for America's global credibility, military operations, and veterans. And so these are 3 Republican congressmen who are advocating for bringing 200,000 additional allies to this country and saying that it would have disastrous consequences if we did not. I'd also like to cite that they mentioned there were over 3,200 documented killings and disappearances of former Afghan military personnel, interpreters, and U.S. government partners thus far. And I can tell you from the pictures I see that does not stop today. That continues today. So it's incredibly dangerous to think that we've just shut off TP, temporary protected status, that will start in May for people who cannot afford to go back and were afforded that critical. That's far from this point, but we have about 10 minutes left, and we've only discussed one of these articles, so I think that we should probably move forward and talk about the second article. And you, Philip, call AfghanEvac an unholy alliance with groups dedicated to undermining Trump's core policies, who have partners in the refugee and resettlement lobby who are licking their chops to process hundreds of thousands, even millions of new Afghan migrants. Shawn, do you think that AE is being taken over by individuals who are searching for open borders, or that the mandate that you're seeking will go beyond assisting our identified allies who have been securely vetted? We've kind of touched on this, but I just want you to be able to say that specifically.
Beth, I'm glad you asked, because Philip, I looked through my inbox and I don't have a single email from you asking me or anybody at AfghanEvac any of the questions that you about any of the accusations you make in your article. And no, the magic of AfghanEvac is that we represent every part of the American experience. People that have been involved in the immigration discussion for years, and people that had just gotten involved because they care about Afghans. We have lawyers, doctors, nurses, police officers, firefighters, teachers. We have a children's book author, people from every state in the nation. And look, we don't let anybody be in charge of the discussion, right? The only thing that we focus on is making sure that advocates and Afghans have the information they need to succeed. We focus on three things: reducing uncertainty, because there's a whole bunch of misinformation, like Philip's articles, out there that just have bad information that's not accurate, that's not real. And that causes chaos and uncertainty and churn and confusion in government and out of government. So we focus on making sure that we have an objective lens on, this is what reality looks like, this is what you can work with. We focus on increasing throughput and efficiency by speeding up the processing and making it more robust, all undergirded by protecting our national security. Our national security is our number one interest. And then finally, we focus on maintaining urgency, because this is an emergency. People are being hunted down and killed. It's not like this is history. This is an ongoing threat to people we promised to protect, using two imperfect programs that have to go through our broken immigration system.
Philip, would you like to respond to that?
My reference to the organizations that are part of the Afghan Evac coalition was simply to draw out the point that these were, in many cases, not in all, but in many cases, the same Biden constituency that worked with the administration, previous administration, to blow up the legal immigration system and to overturn the rule of law on immigration matters. And in fact, in some cases, are now suing the Trump administration against deportation and trying to control the border. My point, Shawn, you're not responsible for them. It was just to make it clear they're in the coalition, so that when the Republican congressman that Beth mentioned, McCall and the others, when they realize that they're doing work with your group, they're also working with key constituents of the Biden presidency who were part of opening our border. That's not misinformation, that's just a fact. Now, it doesn't mean you're responsible for it, but it is useful for the Trump administration and for their allies in Congress to realize that those are part of your part of your coalition.
You didn't mention that all the conservative-leaning folks that are part of the coalition. You didn't mention that we have Trump-appointed officials in our Afghan Evac leadership team. To say that in Afghan Evac there were people that for 3.5 years the administration in charge was willing to work with was a bad thing, we went in, and I don't think there's anybody in the Biden administration that would say Afghan Evac was nice to them. We brought the heat, and we did it because we were able to bring a whole broad cross-section of American society and force them to do the right thing on Afghanistan when they just wanted to ignore it. And President Trump was rightly not ignoring it. He did what President Biden should have done and sat with those Abigail families for 6 hours in their pain. He visited the grave of our Abigail fallen.
Well, President
Biden refused to do any of that. Those are the types of people that are involved in our coalition. It's everybody. It's not who gives a shit if there are folks that wanted to fight with the Trump administration. There's also folks that want to fight with the Biden administration. That's why it works. It works because it's everybody. And that, hopefully, is why it will work in this administration, because we've got to keep our promises to these folks. Failure is not an option.
Okay, stipulated. But my point, you accused me of misinformation. No, it was not misinformation in my op-ed. It was bringing out the fact that in your coalition are these organizations. That's not misinformation, Shawn.
Well, it's incomplete information to make a political point, to try to drive a wedge between folks that are trying to keep our promises to our allies, because CIS doesn't believe anybody should come here.
Well, we believe that the president is on the right path in pausing the massive abuse of migration into our country. 50 million people, 16% of the population. We have never been at such historically high numbers. It's a perfectly legitimate position that was, in fact, voted for by the American people.
Not a single voter voted to kick Afghans out of this country or to not bring Afghans.
No, I would dispute.
In fact, 90%
we're not
of the
kicking
American
that.
public
We're
supports
pausing.
relocating and resettling our Afghan allies.
You are emotionally tied up in this, Shawn, and I applaud your service, your commitment, and so forth. But I've just come back to the idea that maybe the best solution for our friends in Afghanistan is not a ticket to suburban Maryland. It's to fight for their country. They have noble traditions of fighting for their country, resisting and outlasting an occupation or crazy leadership. It's a complicated country. I don't dispute that.
Listen.
The answer is not to bring them all here.
Well, I want to say something. For our Afghan women who worked with us, they can't work inside their homeland. 2/3 of women-led households in Afghanistan right now have not adequate nutrition because women cannot work. Women cannot leave their homes without a male escort. If you do not have one, you are in incredible danger. The number of women who are experiencing death during childbirth is on the rise, even though the Taliban do not want that information going out. It is an incredibly deadly place, especially for the women who worked with us. And so the idea that we're not looking... We need to look at this so very carefully and not with just a big, let's axe it all, or we're going to cause an incredible quantity of harm. But I want to ask, Phillip, you mentioned this in the beginning too, that our allies can drive an Uber or open up a restaurant in our country. And I just wondered, are those the jobs that you expect refugees can hold inside of the U.S. if they're coming from Afghanistan? Are those the only jobs that an Afghan...
That was part of an op-ed, Beth. As you know, this was an op-ed to make a point, to draw attention to certain advocacy points of view that I thought were necessary to be discussed and to be recognized. Obviously, Afghans are very capable people who can do other things. They can be doctors, dentists, or whatever. I simply return to the question of all of that tragedy, all of that hardship cannot be answered by bringing people to the United States. And my question to you, Beth, is how many would you think is the appropriate number that we extract from Afghanistan's 38 million people and bring them to America?
Phillip, I'm glad you asked me that. Honestly, I tread between these two things where I want to see us fulfill our promise to our allies. Absolutely. But I also want to see the Taliban expunged from their country. And I don't know how that happens, but I know that it can't happen with the Afghan legal professionals. They're not going to lead a rebellion. And I know that many of the Afghans that I've spoken with, because I am a conservative, as you are, Phillip, and I cut my teeth writing about the terrors of illegal immigration. And this doesn't even come into my mind when I think about Afghans, because the Afghans I speak with tell me, I didn't come here because I wanted a free ticket, to freedom. That was not their goal. And that's what I think in the conservative circles we often think, is that people want to come here because it's America and it's the greatest country on the planet. Afghans have a love of their homeland that is unlike anything I've ever experienced. I wish I had a love of my homeland that even came close to what Afghans feel about the very dirt that they came from. And they don't want to be here because they want the greatness of America. They want to go back to their homeland, but they can't be there right now. And I think that's an important thing to recognize. I Afghans love their home. They really do. And they're not looking for a free ticket. This is very much, I am in danger. I can't tell you how many images I've seen of dead Afghans in the last 3.5 years. And it wrecks me because I put my life into trying to make Afghanistan a safer place. And it's really hard to see what's happening. But I would say, so to answer your question with numbers, the number of people who can get through our vetting. I absolutely believe our vetting has to be secure, because the last thing I would want is for anything that happened in this country to be tied to work I did. So I understand your concerns, Philip, but I do think that we have increased the vetting on individuals. And if the Trump administration were to come back and say, yep, we paused US RAP, but we're going to put it on and we're going to increase the vetting, if they can, go for it. Absolutely. Please do. That's totally fine with me. So the last question I have for you, Philip, because I know we're at our time, is can you just succinctly describe what makes you believe that the population of allies within US RAP and SIV cause our country to run an unacceptably high risk of admitting terrorists and criminals, like you say in your article?
Well, do you share my point, which was based on whistleblower information, that there has been laxity in vetting Afghans? I'm asking you, Beth, do you think that that's, I mean, I do have that from, I didn't invent that. I have that from whistleblowers.
I don't.
It goes back to a John Feiner decision taken in the interagency process, trying to push through to run the numbers, because he recognized, Feiner did, that the normal vetting procedures would not clear very many of these people.
I have not heard that at all. And in fact, I've seen so many cases where people have been excluded from the program, and state won't even tell you why. They're so protective and so careful about who they let in. I'm not concerned about that at present. Shawn?
I have a bachelor's degree in domestic security management, a master's degree in homeland security and safety engineering. National security has been my life. Protecting our homeland has been my life. I have no concerns about the vetting that happens for Afghans, because it's so robust. It's more vetting than any other population gets. It's more vetting than anybody in the military has to go through to get in, any police officer has to go through to get in, any elected official, certainly, any foreign service officer. So I just think that maybe your whistleblowers are confused or maybe misconstrued something. And it is a multiple layered process, and not a lot of people have the whole picture, so it would be understandable if they didn't. I think they're off base.
Yeah.
All right.
So Shawn, can I ask a question to as well, Beth? So Shawn,
absolutely.
Would you not think, I know we're almost out of time, that perhaps another name for your organization could be Afghan Re-Infiltrate, so that people can fight for their homeland and resist in their homeland? Isn't that a possibility?
What I'm so excited for this opportunity for you is that we hear a lot of people that have ideas about what AfghanEvac could do or should do, or who should be in charge or what. And I have great news. There are forms that you can fill out that you can go and start your own nonprofit. So if you want to create Afghan Re-Infiltrate, by all means, my friend, that is a great retirement job for you. Our mission is to make sure that our wartime allies, those who are in danger because of their association with us, have the information they need to succeed to get to our country and to get to safety. So, no, but I appreciate the idea, and if you need help filling out the business paperwork or anything like that, I'm happy to help you to get that organization off the ground. I'll even serve on your board if you want.
There are groups like that, Philip. There are groups that are trying to get that done. And I just don't think that, to me, it reeks of what created the Taliban. And I don't want to see groups empowered and another cause for instability inside of the country. That is something that I don't think we, right now, without thinking about it, need to be a part of. I think there needs to be a government in exile. I think that this is And I think we should be hands off on that process. We've been too hands on trying to tell Afghans what to do with their country. But I do think that we need to fill the promise that we made to Afghans, which was, you stand by us, we stand by you. When you pull out air support on people and you pull out the contractor force that helped them do their air support, and then you let all of your weaponry fall into the hands of the Taliban, how, pray tell, are they supposed to go and compete with an entity that has $7 billion in American weaponry without putting in additional weaponry, right? I don't see how that works. And I've spent many, many minutes thinking about that with people who've been invested in this just as way longer than I have. And I don't see that we can really do that. Shawn, I final closing words here. Philip, I'll let you go first. Shawn, I'll let you have closing after Philip. Anything?
Well, I applaud your efforts and your humanity with our Afghan allies who were there. I dispute that we should continue to bring them here. I think the Trump administration has paused this for good reason, and I'm hopeful that the president will maintain the pause as we go forward, and that those Afghans who can continue to fight for their country have great success. I do certainly share that point of view. Thank you. Thank
Shawn?
you.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Shawn?
Sure. Look, if the U.S. can't keep its promises to those who bled for us, then our flag means less in the world. This isn't about left or right. It's about right and wrong. The mission isn't over when our war ends. The mission ends when we bring our people home. And all of those things are why this is so important that we do unpause enduring welcome. Our safest, most secure legal immigration path that our country's ever seen. And we bring our allies home until the job is done. We owe it to our veterans. We owe it to our frontline civilians. We owe it to our wartime allies and our allies around the world.
Well, thank you both for being here. Obviously, it's a very heated topic at the moment, and it just goes to show how much people care about this situation. I want to thank all the listeners, obviously, for tuning in, for supporting the people of Afghanistan and their future. And I'll put out the call again to Afghan listeners. Please, if you want to share your stories, we love to hear them and share them here on the podcast. You can send them to the Afghanistan Project podcast at gmail.com. Thank you, Philip and Shawn. Tasha Kaur. Hope to see you all again soon.